We have two presentations today. We will start with Ray Barker and Cale McCammon from Glenstone. I should say I'm Ralph Mansfield. I'll be chairing and keeping things running on time, but I can claim no credit for any of the intellectual content you'll be hearing. And we may as well get underway.
Okay, great. Hi. How's everyone doing today? Great. All right. Thanks for coming. I'm Ray Barker. I'm from Glenstone. I'm the chief archivist librarian there. I've been there, it'll be 2 years in February of next year. And to my left is...
I'm Cale McCammon. I'm the assistant archivist at Glenstone. And yesterday marked my 1-year anniversary with Glenstone, so thanks for throwing me this lovely party.
The cake is on its way.
Yeah.
It's the least we could do.
Okay.
So today we are talking about CollectiveAccess. It's an open source collections management system. And I thought that our presentation today fits in kind of nicely with this year's conference theme about making meaning with people, collections, and information. Because the big picture for me was we brought this tool that had content about our collections and brought it to our staff. And I was just going to start by taking an informal survey of people. Raise hands or chirp like a cricket because we're audio recording this, and that might be fun. You don't have to do that. But raise your hands if you are familiar with CollectiveAccess. Yeah, good. That's a good number. And any of you heard of Glenstone? A couple.
Oh.
And then have you heard of Ray Barker or Cale McCammon before? No. All the hands went up. All the hands went up. So we're talking about that today, and we can get started. Or not. Why is this not turning? There we go. So let me just start about today, the outline for today. So we're going to start with me talking about Glenstone, the who, what, when, where, and why. We're going to talk a little bit about run through the project in chronological fashion, more or less, about identifying our users and our user needs, how the development process went with the developers, what the testing phases were like, everything leading up to the launch and to the launch itself, and then Cale is going to share with you a demo of the system. And then we'll conclude with lessons learned. We have about 5 minutes for questions. So what is Glenstone? Glenstone is a private art museum that's open to the public. You can make reservations online. It's free. It's located in Potomac, Maryland, which is about 25 minutes outside of Washington, D.C. We had our opening in 2006, and since then we've had 4 exhibits, and our current 5th exhibit is featuring the minimal artist Fred Sandbeck. Sorry, I'm either getting sick or there's an allergy here. So the focus of the collection is post-World War II art and featuring sort of the significant artists of that time and significant works. One of our core values or missions is the emphasis of integrating art, architecture, and landscape. And so we do offer outdoor sculpture tours. And we are currently under a major expansion right now, which is about a quarter of a mile away from the building that you see here. And so we'll keep this museum open. We have a projection to open in the future. It's going to be quite large. The exhibit space has been compared to being the size of the east building of the NGA. Might not mean a lot to people. But it'll be about 50,000 cubic feet for the new space. So this will be called the museum, and the new space will be called the pavilions. So access for everyone is a bit of a misnomer in our context because we are only open, the collection information and collection material is only open up to staff. So there's no public outward-facing component to CollectiveAccess for us yet. And also there are sort of limitations on what access means because of limitations for what staff is permitted to see due to some of the confidential information in the collections. So I just wanted people to keep that in mind as we talk today, that's sort of an interesting notion and that there are certain limitations in those concepts for us. So life BCA before CollectiveAccess, like the prehistoric times maybe, I don't know, but we'll figure that out. So Cale and I started on this project right almost when things were done. So this was something that we were told of by the librarian and the art person who helped serve on the committee to choose this collection management system. So some of this information was just passed along to us about how things were managed there. The art collection had just this system called ArtBase. So it had no public or web-based access, and it was used just by 4 or 5 staff members. ReaderWare was the system that was used by the library, and it's more of a personal library management kind of system. And then for archives, they were just spreadsheets that were used by archive staff, and so the description was entirely separate from the content. And we needed a system that would sort of combine these 3 different environments intellectually. So our IT department of 1 is represented in this slide that he provided to me. So the environment at the time before CollectiveAccess was just a small files server. And if he needed additional space, he would just buy additional piece to add to his storage device. He found this system as it existed then sort of unscalable. So it's an upside down pyramid of our users. So total staff at Glenstone was about 50, so we're a pretty small museum. Curatorial staff is about 5, registrars 1, there's 1 conservator, 3 members of the library and archives team, and 2 interns, and then visitors experience, which is about 10 guides and docents, and then 1 director. So we have 2 founders, Mitch and Emily Rails, and 2 administrative officers. And finally, operations, grounds, HR comes to about 12. So this is the structure of our potential users. And then what did we need? So we needed an integrated system that allowed for back-end cataloging and front-end access. We needed a system for art that tracked loans, accessions, deaccessions, registration information, conservation information. And for library, some examples of things that we needed was a search function, a checkout system for the library items. And for archives, we wanted something that would play back our large collection of video, of artist interviews, audio, and document management. The open source aspect of it, we wanted something that we could have some influence and control over it in the development, and something that was customizable per user's roles. I don't want to go too much into that. Just the fact that there are unique users who have specific requirements for permissions of information they can see. And then something that supported professional standards. So for the art side of that, it was VRA core. For the library, it's the use of Library of Congress and MARC records and Getty thesaurus. And for archives, we use Dublin Core and DAX. So this is kind of what the development looked like. So Whirligig came to Glenstone in November of 2013, and within 4 months, we'd done the first test site. And so we tested that, and the first feedback went back to Whirligig, who's based in New York City, by the way, and they put that into their development and came back to Glenstone, and the feedback loop was developed leading up to the launch. And again, I wanted to state that Cale and I came on towards the tail end of all of this, and I don't think it was like a significant impact, but just one of those things that have implications for later, some decisions that were made, particularly by the archives staff at that time, which was 1 person, sort of specific requirements that she had that we, now using the tool, probably are in the process of tweaking. And so these were the 3 players in the development. Glenstone, of course, Whirligig, who I've talked about, and then who I haven't mentioned was Hartman Executive Advisors. They were consultants who attended the weekly conference calls with Whirligig, who encouraged communication, made sure we stuck to deadlines, that everyone stuck to deadlines, and that advised to keep the project on track and that we stayed within the contractual obligations. So here are the 3 phases. So much of this system was driven by the art collection and information and data related to the art collection. So they kind of were the main motivator for us getting this system. And so they launched first in September of 2014. The library was closely after that in November, and last but not least, archives in January of 2015. So the training for us occurred at this point. Whirligig came out and trained us, which was Cale, myself, and 3 other individuals, including IT, about how to use the system. And then it was left up to us to fan out what we learned to the rest of the staff. And I talk more about that later. But I'm done talking now, and Cale will show you the system.
Hi, everyone. So we thought we'd actually go ahead and show you the system. It feels a bit like an infomercial, but it's not intended to feel that way. This is more like a grown-up version of show and tell of something that we accomplish at our very small but very complicated private art museum. So I have here a screen recording of the front-end web portal interface, and some things might look a little bit funny because I am zoomed in on my browser. And so what you're seeing here is a branded web portal that all of our staff accesses. It's designed sort of in a it follows a three-pronged design with the art, the library, and the archives occupying equal weight in the system. It's also branded, as you can see, and then it's also themed according to whatever we might want to advertise. So if we have an artwork on loan, each side advertises an asset related to that event. So I will go ahead and play this and just comment over it. So as I said, there are three prongs to the page. There's the art side, there's the library side, and there's the archive side, and they're all integrated and assets are related between each. There is the branded logo up there, and then each side is advertising an asset according to a specific theme. So on the archive side, that's actually a video thumbnail. So I thought we'd go ahead and start with a basic search, and this will search records across all of the system. So let's search the word Sandback because we're exhibiting the work of Fred Sandback. So let's go ahead and click this. And then you see the search results also sort of follow a three-pronged design with the artwork ribbon, the archives ribbon, and then also the library ribbon. So you can see all of the artworks where the word Sandback appears in the record. So in that scrolling, it just scrolls down the list. And then you also see the archives ribbon, which is anywhere where the word Sandback appears in the record. This includes PDF documents that are full text searchable. So if the word Sandback appeared in a document, it would also pop up. We configured it because we wanted robust search results to appear. And then also the library ribbon, which includes thumbnails to books, and then you can click the thumbnail to get to their bibliographic record. As far as I'm aware, this was a first for Whirligig implementing collective access for a library collection as well. So I thought I'd go ahead and click the art side so you can see the art advanced search page, which searches only artwork records by a certain number of fields, title, date, artist, and then also sort of a free text field. And on the right side, we have profiles of our 5 exhibitions, including the current one on Fred Sandback. And then scrolling down, we have sort of a browse artist by last name, which was one of the requests from our founders. Much of the system sort of is a balance between these customized requests and then also sort of out-of-the-box features. So I thought we'd go ahead and click the Glenstone exhibition profile of the Fred Sandback exhibition. And here you can see kind of a brief description about it, the dates and the title of it. And then also one of the more robust features of the system, and one reason why we implemented it, was the ability to relate assets to certain records. So you see here all of the artworks which appear in the exhibition. It just scrolls just like the search results page. And then also all the related library materials which which relate to the exhibition insofar as the artworks appear in those books. So since this is a museum conference, I thought I'd go ahead and click on one of those artwork records so that way you can see what it looks like. So let's go ahead and click this. And then you see here on the left side thumbnails appearing and also an array of alternative thumbnails. On the right side, we have tombstone information. The fact sheet would contain exhibition history and so on. But scrolling further down, we have items from other departments relating to this record. So related archive items, that's a video which mentions that artwork. Related library materials is a book in which that artwork appears. So that's really one of the robust and unique features of this system, and one of the main reasons why we implemented it. So I thought I'd go ahead and show off the library advanced search page, which searches by a number of bibliographic fields. Our librarian actually presented on this separately at a conference, so we won't go into it in too much detail just for time. But we also customized this interface to link to external databases for research purposes. So on the archives advanced search page, it searches by a number of fields which we customized with the developers by type of document, by collection, and so on. And we also have customized the design of it to link to external databases to keep it consistent with the library advanced search page, and also to help with research. But one of the unique things that we worked with the developers to implement was the ability to browse by archival collections. Since Ray and I both come from non-museum archives, this was more familiar to us. So we have here kind of a work in, admittedly even a year out, it's still a work in progress, outline of all of our collections, each appearing on this page with a brief abstract of its contents. So we can click one of these collection titles, and we go to what is most recognizably a finding aid, which follows kind of the DAX standard of things with abstract, provenance, date, and so on, and then also a link on the right side with hyperlinked sections of that finding aid. This was pretty much customized for us. And then scrolling down, we have sort of the series and sub-series listing that typical archival collections follow, which can be collapsed or expanded. And then we have the other series of this collection, which is primarily artist interviews, videos of fabrications, video documentation of our expansion project, and so on. And so I thought I'd go ahead and scroll down to the sub-series of Fred Sandback so that we can see what this looks like. And then going to the, this brings up the search results page, which has the typical things that a user might want, the ability to filter by a certain number of fields, artist, exhibition, date, and then collection, and so on. You see the search results are primarily videos and 2 documents. The 2 documents are transcripts of the videos. So we can click one of these videos and see how that looks. On the right side, we have descriptive information, and also which also relates to the entity records on the back end. This plays just like a YouTube video, which our users really like. And then also the related archive item is a transcript, the transcript of the video, which is full text searchable. If you were to type in something, a keyword, it would pop up. So one of the features that we implemented to foster collaboration across departments is the sort of lightbox feature, which is sort of like a personal shopping cart or personal collection. So we worked with the developers to implement kind of a checkbox. We want to add this item to our lightbox. We want to add this one to our lightbox. So we can go ahead and click each asset, add it to a lightbox. Let's say name it Fred Sandback MCN. It's auto-completing here because I did it on a test run. But so we go ahead, save it. And then we go up here to our kind of accounts, our profile, so to speak, and we can click Lightbox. We see that Lightbox. It's a little bit squished because I'm zoomed in. So we can click that Lightbox, and then after a brief flourish of the mouse, we can select to share these assets with any number of our users, someone who might be doing research, someone on our curatorial staff or our visitor experience team, and so on. So it's a pretty unique and robust system that relates all the records from different departments and also has some collaborative elements. So let's go back home, and I will pass it off to Ray. Thanks.
Great. Well, great. Thanks, Cale. So life after launch, as I said before, there were a lot of ongoing training. So once we got the system, we can just leave it on the doorstep of all the staff at Glenstone and say good luck. So we provided general trainings to people and then specific trainings one-on-one and that sort of thing. So we made it a part of the new hire process with the onboarding and made it as if any HR thing, and it would just follow up, and we would show them around and show them the system, grouping new hires by a month or so. So we've done that a couple of times. We sent out a survey on the anniversary of the launch. It was about 15 questions, and that was really helpful to us to get a sense of who was using it and did we anticipate it correctly, and we did. So it was mostly used by curatorial staff and collections. And then there was sort of a big drop-off after that where the grounds and the operations was almost 0 users. And so, I don't know, my thoughts were we just let it go and that's just the reality. Not everyone's going to use it, or we try to tackle that divide a little bit more and see if we can diminish it a little bit. So that's what we've done. It was we had a pizza party with operations and sort of had the IT guy there, and the big issue was just they weren't even sitting down to log in. So that sort of was the first step, and then we're meeting in about 2 weeks to highlight specific sculptures to inform them not just of the system, but sort of to educate them so that they can speak to visitors with some degree of confidence. So there's continual development of the system. We're, as I said, tweaking things that were put in place from before we got there, but also looking for things that we can ask for that weren't in that initial stage, such as user statistics, who's using what assets are being accessed the most, and other reporting functions that we're all three areas are exploring more aggressively. And then just speaking personally, the refinement of the workflows, I'm speaking of Cale and myself largely, sort of standardizing and making things more systematic for our department. This isn't advancing again. So this is kind of the follow-up snapshot of the slide from before for the IT and the environment now, which was in tandem with the launch of CollectiveAccess, that it's now more of a virtualized environment that provides more for better scalability, and there's more of a disaster recovery effort in place now. Constructive takeaway. So this is a shot actually of the construction site, so it's benign enough that I could use it. There's the construction has gone beyond what you see here. So so the takeaway is the notion about one system solves all problems for everyone forever. It's not the case, but this system fit our needs really well. And a small staff who has concerns about privacy and the notion about sharing the assets across the three environments, the scalability, the close contact with the developers, all of that worked really well for us. I was going to say there was a session yesterday about project management for digital projects, and one of their definitions of success was whether at the project's end that the things are being used, and I would say that this was a success, that we are using this tool quite a bit. Another takeaway was thinking in the long term. I mentioned that earlier about how our decisions way back when impact what we do now, but also the things that Cale and I are developing for people beyond us. These are decisions we have to give some thought to. And the systems are not solutions, that they aren't going to solve all of your problems necessarily. They're going to refine your work and make it more efficient. And then we wanted the system that would be sort of rigid, but also flexible enough for the tweaking that we're doing. And that done equals, that we're not ever done. As I said, we're sort of constantly refining things. So that's it. I failed to say that before Glenstone became public, it had a farm component to it. So there was a suburban housing development, and then the museum kind of was built from that. But we had alpacas and sheep and goats there that are no longer. So anyway, we hope they come back. But thank you.
Thanks, Ray and Cale. We do have a few minutes for questions. David.
So I'm curious about the archival and museum components, or I'm sorry, archival and library components. Those were custom developed for you, is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and let me ask, since this is being audio recorded, if you can please restate the question briefly on mic, that'd be great.
Yeah, so the question was, were the library and archive side custom developed for us? Yeah, they were. I think CollectiveAccess had been implemented at other institutions, and it had this sort of the same framework that it could be applied to like a library and an archive. And so it's particularly like on the archive side, this sort of finding aid, archival collection arrangement type of things. That was something we worked with the developers on. And as far as I know, CollectiveAccess had never been implemented to handle library materials. So this was a first.
So are they rolling any of that work back into the core project or no?
I imagine so. I imagine Whirligig are, yeah.
Would you or could you use any of this for sort of like the back-end business parts of it? I'm thinking like rights and reproductions or relevant terms from a gift or a loan agreement? Could you tie that stuff in?
Yeah, I mean, I was going to speak for archives. I was going to, and Cale, you can respond. Like, we have someone that does oral histories with artists, and just recently, I think it was 2 weeks ago, she has paper files, she has digital files. It's the agreements with those artists, and so basically, that would be sort of a perfect thing to connect to the records. It has that back end administrative value, but no research value on the front end. So we just upload it. It's connected there, associated with the record, and it's there for everyone. So that's where we are with that.
Yeah, and our registrar handles loan requests in the system, so the loan gets its own sort of record in a form that you fill out in the system. I wouldn't call the system a digital asset management system. I would call it a collection management system with a digital media component. So it's a little bit gray in the sense that you have these records, and each, like an artwork, and each one can have media attached to it. And that media does have metadata. So if you're thinking it might be a digital asset management system, I wouldn't quite call it that, but so I hope that answers your question. Oh, and anyway, the question was about whether this would handle business types of things, loan records, documentation, things like that.
I think that's something we'd want to exploit in the future more too. That we're still sort of, the learning curve is still there.
Could you just talk a little bit more about the back end and about how you're loading data, how you're cataloging things? Is it essentially one thing at a time, or you batch load?
It's a little bit of both. So the question was about how do we catalog on the back end? Is it one item at a time, or can we do batch uploads? Do you want to answer that?
Yeah, so for the legacy documentation, all the records from the pre-existing databases, that was all imported and facilitated by the developers Whirligig. So with our configuration, because we've limited some functions to sort of the administrator, and some functions to the users like me and Ray, we are able to say import multiple media and have that automatically create a record, and then also kind of collectivize that in the back end and apply bulk metadata operations, basically. Yeah.
I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about the training and the work with the sort of curatorial staff, sort of this idea that you had of bringing pizza for the grounds work. Was there sort of resistance for the time of, we have to learn a new system, and how you address that across the
Yeah, the question was about how the trainings were handled and how was that managed, and was there any resistance to that? And Cale, you can respond too. So it would be a combination of, so the grounds, like their director is the one who came up with this idea, which is like, and these guys are outside all day, that's, so when I said that they didn't have the first phase was just getting them to log in and make sure their password worked. Like I guess I didn't mean that with derision. It was just right. I just wanted to make that clear. But then, the director of the grounds crew suggested it, and so we went out of our workspace to their workspace in quite a distance away. So that, I guess there's some symbolism there. I guess you can look at us getting out and going to where they are. Had its advantages, but they appreciated having us there. So at that level with him, that individual was really supportive. And then I think his staff really enjoyed having us there, enjoyed that it was sort of open-ended, that we're coming back, all that stuff. But then I think moving on to the sort of the individuals of the curatorial staff and the registrar, and that, do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. So I found that our grounds crew was really, really, really invested in it and really interested in it, which is really cool. I think it's been interesting because the greater challenge isn't incorporating new staff and getting them acclimated to it. It's changing the ways of of staff who have been there longer, who have been doing their practices a certain way. And I think we found that to be a greater challenge than reaching out to staff who aren't familiar with the system at all, or incorporating new staff. So I think we have a bit more to work on when it comes to other staff who are rooted in their older ways of practice.
Great. Well, thank you again, Ray and Cale.
Yeah.
We will move on to our second presentation here with Tracy Berg-Fulton from the Carnegie Museum of Art. And if people do think of other questions that may somehow cut across or connect both of these presentations, once Tracy is presented and we've had a little Q&A focused on hers, maybe we can think about these things together. So Tracy.
Greetings, my excellent friends. I am Tracy Berg-Fulton, and I'm Collections Database Associate at the Carnegie Museum of Art in Pittsburgh, PA. So you can all hear me? Yeah? Okay, cool. We had a little technical difficulties. So excellent. You can reach me at my Twitter handle, which is @Berg-Fulton, and I've got a little hashtag for this session, which is #BeExcellent, just so I can follow up any questions that happen in the back channel, or if you happen to think of anything while I'm talking and just don't want to get up and blab at the end, that's fine. So, on we go. The title of this talk is Be Excellent to Each Other, the Future of Provenance Research. And in this talk, I'm going to talk about provenance research using the philosophy of Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure. Those of you who are looking at me blankly, that's probably most of you who are younger than 25, you have a date with Netflix tonight, and just trust me on this one. So in my job, most of my time is spent doing provenance research, database cleanup, and figuring out some historical recording weirdness. Basically, my entire day is spent a little like this. But in reality, I've got 99 problems, and probably a lot more. But my biggest problem on a daily basis is, how do I get access? Provenance is really a decathlon of access. Access to people, access to documents, and things. Well, in the past, it looked like moseying over to the good old card catalog. Again, those who are looking at me with a blank stare, ask someone older than you. This was WorldCat analog. And so now that we have the internet, let's fast forward to the future, maybe? Probably not. At any rate, this isn't the future I really want to focus on. I want to focus on the immediate future of provenance research. Perhaps in a few years we can Oculus our way to a hologram of something, but right now the best we're doing, which is pretty darn good actually, looks a lot like digital full-text resources like the Internet Archive, like HathiTrust, like Gallica, but it also looks a little bit like your museum website and your collection search. You can even be fancy like the British Museum and have a Sparkle endpoint. So it sounds like we're aces right now, right? It sounds like provenance research should be a walk in the park. And yet, while that's true, and the research is better and easier than it has ever been, most days I go home like this, disappointed, most non-triumphant, because yet again, I could not get access to the piece of information I was desperately seeking. And sometimes that information is relatively minor, like the correct spelling of someone's name, or it can indicate that an object was involved in the Nazi plunder of assets in Europe. So the need for this information access is kind of huge. And when I say access, I actually mean a couple different things. It can mean that I actually do need to put my grubby little mitts on an item, or it could just be an image, and it doesn't even have to be a good one. I'll settle for a study image, because I trust you guys. I'll also settle for a transcription or a summary of the item. I'll take your word for it. Some people have even gotten creative and made digital representations of the data, and I'm thinking more specifically about some exhibition history timelines in interactive publications here. And the Chicago Art Institute actually has an amazing exhibition history timeline, so if you're here, thank you for that. But I also mostly need access to your people. And as in most things, there are barriers, and there are many. I don't need to tell a room full of museum people that money is a barrier, both as a provenance researcher and as a provenance repository. There's also the issue of distance. As somebody from the Mid-Atlantic, I have problems getting to New York or to London where everything is held. Access guidelines are actually one of my biggest pet peeves because these are barriers that we've actually created for ourselves. This is kind of our own doing. And this includes if you put phrases like, only valid research requests will be answered, or must have letter from Institute of Higher Education, or if you have wacky hours or procedures that prevent people from getting access. There's also the barrier of uncatalogued or unlisted collections, and this is kind of related to time and money as above. We can't all have an archivist on staff. But if no one knows you have it, no one is going to ask you for it. And if you don't have a listing of who to contact to even get that information, it could be assumed that there isn't someone, or that your question will fly into that email abyss, along with all of the left socks of the world. And this isn't just me having a gripe about how my job is hard. It is, but that's a story for another day, and I can talk to you about that later. I bring it up because these barriers are preventing provenance from moving forward. We're 15 years from the AAM and AAMD guidelines on provenance research for Nazi-era assets, and we're still nowhere near done. Many museums are still struggling to do provenance because of the cost, time, and money and distance. And you know what? I think that that's bogus. But what's the future? Well, one thing's for sure, and that's that the future will not be digitized. Actually, that's not entirely right. the immediate future will not be digitized. In the future, maybe we'll have all of our institutional archives fully digitized and correctly cataloged, but that doesn't do anything to help us today, tomorrow, or next week, and doesn't help us to do provenance better in this short term. So let's focus on this immediate future, the things we can do better quick-ish. And don't stop digitizing stuff, seriously, that's amazing. But digitization is time-consuming and expensive, and it requires a big lift that not a lot of institutions can handle on an ongoing basis. So perhaps we need to look a little bit to our library friends here. I'm fortunate to work 500 feet from a library that holds 1.2 million books, but also does things like lend sewing machines, have language learning hours, has genealogy databases, and pretty much anything else you can want, including a really lovely cafe. The point I'm trying to make here is that libraries have made a spot for themselves in communities as hubs of information and places where people want to be and are allowed to be and are given free access to this information. Their secret sauce is their expertise, their knowledge, and documentation that the institution holds and the staff provides and freely shares. If museums did away with their staff but left all the objects in place, what would distinguish that space from any other? Museums are really good at being really smart about their objects. Even when we have mystery objects, we know that we don't know. It's our secret sauce. It is what enables us to present our objects in person and online in most excellent ways. But if we look to our library friends, we could ask, how can we give as much away as possible to as many as possible? What are we holding back from our big umbrella public, not just those who can afford to visit us in person, and for what purpose? Libraries are so excellent at giving stuff to people that they use their network to give people the things they don't have on hand. And this is kind of interlibrary loan. What would this look like in the museum world? What could our network do together to give people more? So maybe we start looking towards our friends Bill and Ted and be excellent to each other. And that's cool and all, I hear you saying, but what does that actually mean? And I don't want to start adding to the museum swear jar list here. What does being excellent look like in terms of provenance? And as kind of a more broad topic that really relates to provenance, museum data. Well, being excellent means, yes, that most boring of topics that we've been talking about since the 2000s, continued publication of your collections, and that includes putting your whole database online, bad or no images at all. But further, it should include publishing of your collections data and metadata. And we can continue to push for radical collections transparency, including provenance. That means being unafraid to share collections data. And if you want to reach way out there and go really out on a limb, our policies around collections. I think that provenance is often excluded from the digital publications of collections, probably because of a fear of a restitution case. Provenance can also change rapidly, and there's a high degree of uncertainty around the data. So the fear of being wrong is pretty real, but we really gotta let that go. Not only because it holds us back from doing great work and from being open partners in research, because if we're caught out from being wrong in provenance, we've probably received valuable information about our collection and provenance in return. Museums are really trusted sources of information. People believe what we say is true. If a museum gets a correction, it's probably a good idea to take a look at it, because it takes some bravery to challenge an institution, much like the first time you've ever pointed out an error to your math teacher. And finally, as an industry and community, we need to continue to build on these relationships we build at these awesome conferences and that we build online. We need this culture of collaboration, of sharing, and of access to move provenance forward. But perhaps we need a museum Erdos number. I didn't think I was going to talk about mathematicians at a museum conference, but hey, let's go there. Paul Erdos was a Hungarian mathematician who was also a most righteous dude. He was a prolific collaborator and publisher. So much that there's emerged in mathematics the idea of a museum, or of an Erdos number, which calculates a person's collaborative distance from Paul Erdos. Initially, it was intended as of an indication of how closely an individual had worked with a great mathematician, but has evolved into a tool to study how mathematicians cooperate with each other to find answers to unsolved problems. And unsolved problems is kind of a nice little summary of provenance. What if we had a museum Erdos number, calculating the collaborative distance between museums, between researchers, and between the public? And what if this was used as an accreditation metric? What if we took this dedication to collaboration as seriously as we take climate, as seriously as we take interpretation, as seriously as we take education? But part of being able to collaborate is being able to connect. And this is where the future and the immediate future are indeed digital. Yay! So maybe we could implement something like ICANN has provenance. The hashtag ICANN has PDF started circulating among a community of academics on Twitter who were frustrated by their inability to access academic journals or other publications because of their institutional affiliations or lack thereof. The tag connects those seeking articles with those who have access to these databases and articles, and the article is usually shared via email. I can see a world in which me having this catalog, I can share it with you via this hashtag. And that's a great way for us to really expose some of the uncatalogued collections in our museums. For instance, like Carnegie has a gigantic backlog of New York City auction catalogs, but you never know that because we have no listing of them, we have no finding aid, and basically they might as well not exist, and I know. So maybe we could start using a hashtag like ICANN has Provenance to connect each other like that. Provenance, however, being such a linked thing, is so important that we publish it because we can help discover common ancestors. Discovering that common ancestor can help you start to unravel the other events surrounding the provenance of your own item. So if you see that both museums have the same ancestor and that one museum is listing him as having an auction at Christie's in a certain year, you may go, oh, okay, well, maybe my painting was also at this Christie's auction. It's another avenue to start your research. And the same is kind of true for starting to make your provenance source materials, like those exhibition catalogs and auction catalogs that we all have cluttering up our office, maybe discoverable through a finding aid or however basic. I'm talking like PDF level basic here. I don't need anything fancy. So we've established that we've got some issues around provenance, so maybe we need an issues tracker. And this is another maybe digital hack that we could use to connect each other. So last year, a friend of mine set up a GitHub repo for our small municipality. He invited residents to submit GitHub issues tickets about the things that plague city life. I'm talking line painting, potholes, dangerous intersections, loud music, the kind of like fiddly stuff that plagues municipality life. He then trained members of the council and the public works department and individual citizens on how to use it. And not only connected people with problems to those who could solve them, but it provided an extra layer of transparency. Solutions were not just directed at the resident who had complained, but visible to everyone. And surprise, things actually started getting fixed. So maybe we do the same for provenance. If you're looking for a specific citation in a library or archive far away, and I am looking directly at you, British Library, in your reader's pass, but cannot go, someone who is going or is local can pull the material for you and report back. Basically, the idea is that our network is small and that we'll be needing each other for something in the future. So it's a little bit of a provenance back scratch. Like, I have access to this library, you have access to that library, we both have a citation, it takes 5 minutes to pull a book. I've actually set up a little GitHub repo for this at github.com/provenancecollaborative to get this started. And if you just go to the issues side, you can just type it in like a Word doc. I promise you it's not as terrifying as it looks. Let's keep talking about GitHub, because why not? But what about using GitHub as a place to host files and let people muck around with it? That's great, let's put stuff there, absolutely. But for some, GitHub is a terrifying place that is distinctly not for them because they are not developers or not technology savvy. If the only Get you know is your downhill mountain unicycling brother, that's a British English joke, sorry, you may never actually find that file or have any idea how to get to it or use it. So maybe that file is somewhere else too, maybe on your homepage. After all, being excellent is about getting as much information to as many as possible and not privileging those with superior technology skills. And if you don't want to put it out somewhere else, at least make it easy to find. Signpost that like a neon roadhouse. And use that special sauce to write a really kick-ass README that will help people actually make sense of this fire hose of data that you've given them. Don't just say, here you go. And as awesome as GitHub and Twitter and the Internet Archive are, and as awesome as they are tools to connect each other, they're not going to replace humans. And one of the most excellent and easy things we can do for each other is to publish clear contact information. Seriously, I guarantee you your web people can do this in 5 minutes with their eyes closed. If you do not have your archivist or librarian listed on your contact page, please do that tonight. If I'm emailing like info@museum.org, which goes to, I'm sure, like some like big pond of email, I don't really expect an answer. I just kind of shoot it out there because I'm kind of required to, it's my job. But if I can email somebody either at name@museum.org or archive@museum.org, I've got way more confidence there. So identifying these people by name, giving them a presence, is actually really important. It's a signal to researchers that you take this information and you take these queries seriously. So consider giving your research and archive and information science people some space on your site. Again, it's a sign that you respect their expertise and that you actually have this expertise. And finally, I really want to encourage you all to be information professional cheerleaders, that is, cheerleaders of your information professionals. That's your archivists, your librarians, your database folk, your registrars, your researchers. They're really fonts of knowledge. They'll probably be really happy to tell you some really random stuff about your collection. And they're a great point of contact for the public. Be supporters of them, talk to them, see where you can learn from each other, and be a cheerleader of their work, and let them be a cheerleader of yours. And on this path to excellence, I'm sure you're going to hear this phrase more than once, but what if we're wrong? Yep, it's a possibility, and I'd actually say it's a reality. But we're wrong about stuff all the time. I can go upstairs in my gallery at home and find 5 typos without really even trying. We're wrong about stuff all the time. So to get around this, my first piece of advice is take a deep breath, and then emulate the disco chicken, and have no regrets, and then fix it. This sounds really simple, but we get really wrapped up in having this freak out moment about it being wrong, and it's actually really easy to just fix it. We're not doing brain surgery here, folks. No one's dying. I guarantee you the ceiling will not fall down. And while someone would argue that being wrong makes you look bad, I'd actually counter that and say it's your reaction to being wrong that makes you look bad. If you're a most excellent museum and accept this feedback and actually learn from it and do something proactive with it, no problems. Being bogus and either suppressing the information out of this fear or not accepting this feedback because it doesn't come from an expert will in fact make you look pretty bogus. So I really feel like this whole talk kind of gets to the core idea of data as part of the duty to public trust. In the registrarial world, which I come from, we take the duty to public trust, that is the duty to be stewards of objects for the public, pretty darn seriously. But we seem to balk at the idea that the data and metadata around these objects are also part of the public trust. My question to this is, but whose data is it anyways? And if we're not really willing to share and disseminate the data we have, then why do we spend ridiculous amounts of hours trying to capture it? Really, I could find way more interesting and useful things to do with my time than read 400-year-old Italian manuscripts all day long. So if you're not going to use it, why bother and why spend the money? And why do we privilege one person's access over another? Why would we give a PhD access, but we don't also give your homebrew history buff that same access? What makes that PhD more worthy than your homebrew history buff or someone who's just plain curious? And I promise you, I absolutely promise you, that there are no malicious bands of internet trolls who are going to blast you with fake provenance. Yes, you may get requests for restitution. That's the reality. But part of being an excellent museum is dealing with those requests with good faith and due diligence and not trying to hide it. So maybe we start to think of provenance and data as a doorway. Doorways work way better when people know where they are, and I kind of take Sina's point that doorknobs are kind of bogus, so let's not worry about that. Make sure people know where it is through signage or design. Make sure that it's open because it works better when it's open. Friends don't need to knock, and they can make themselves at home. So share abundantly and make sure they know what they're looking at. It really opens both ways, so give and receive. And occasionally it needs an update or repair. This is like feeding the open source puppy. Like open source is really cute and happy and you really love it, but it does actually require some time and tending and maintenance. So creating a sustainable workflow and keeping an eye on how it's being used and even how we can improve it. So let's take a little minute and I will talk about how we made provenance a little less bogus at CMOA. So about a year and a half ago, I joined the art tracks team at CMOA working on provenance visualizations and data. Over time, the project kind of took on a life of its own and morphed into a kind of a cross-departmental party. We discovered that it's hard to do computer stuff with provenance without curators, registrars, archivists, and educators. And museum staff discovered that how much better things can be when computers do some of the lifting. This collaboration has yielded a series of software tools and a user interface called ELIZA, which assists us in writing provenance that adheres to our souped-up version of the AAM provenance standard, which we've creatively called the CMOA provenance standard. You just gotta call spade a spade sometimes. So we've released all of the code for this project on the CMOA GitHub account because we've discovered that not only does it make our data much more tidy, but we hope that it will enable others to do provenance better, taking away some of the possibility for human error and confusion, and having to really learn a syntax that's not really a natural human way of writing. And one side effect of art tracks and of doing a more digital provenance is that we've had to look at all 30,000 plus records as part of an ecosystem. We export our entire collections database every night, so it was natural we started to ask a few more questions of it. After a random question formed through the registrar's listserv about how the size of our collection has changed over time, kind of related to actually buying a truck for transporting objects, our lead developer, David Newberry, created a series of visualizations about that question and around other data already housed in our collections database. This is stuff we already had. We didn't have to create this content. It already lived there. We just had never asked it to do anything for us. And these visuals inspired us to think more deeply about how we could be using this data, maybe for collections planning, maybe for budgeting even. And it highlighted some goofs in our data entry. And overall, the ecosystem of collections data is getting more and more excellent and more connected by the day. The other side effect is that we've released this data for download, not on November 1st, that was our intended, but we actually really legitimately did release this like 10 minutes ago. So if you want yay, we should celebrate. This is like a birthday, yay! So if you want to go and download like the world's biggest CSV file or JSON file, you can totally do that. So it's on our GitHub. And there's a lot more to art tracks. I mean, a lot more. That's an entire another talk. So you can find myself or David Newberry or Neil Koulis. We're all floating around. We're almost all here. And you can talk to us more specifically about that. But you can also just check out our GitHub, and all that information is there. So all of this may sound like I'm asking you to do a lot more than you're already doing, and I'm being honest. Yeah, I am. But I want to frame it as we're doing a few more things more excellently. And that is to make provenance a priority, to refocus on this. Yeah, we're 15 years out from the AAM mandate. Maybe it's time to try it one more time from the top. To make provenance transparent and make it exposed and not privilege one person's access over another. To champion data openness. Be cheerleaders of your information professionals. Remember the disco chicken and have no regrets. Take a deep breath, have a little party, and then fix it. And with that, I'm going to sign off with, again, some more advice from the most excellent ones. And that's be excellent to each other and party on, dudes.